Hi, English students. We're back for another section of the Odyssey. This section is called The Cattle of the Sun God. The sun god is Helios. We want to remember that at the very beginning of the Odyssey, we had foreshadowing. We were told from the very beginning that something bad was going to happen to Odysseus's crew because they were acting like fools and they disobeyed a warning that they should not touch the cattle of the sun god. So this is the last terrible adventure that Odysseus is going to tell King Alcinous. Remember, he's with the Phaeacians and he's telling his story. He was washed up there. He basically is in great need of help for food, for shelter, for safety. And King Alcinous is going to give it to him. And he's even going to provide him a ship to get home. But this is the last terrible tale that Odysseus is going to tell happened to him during his 10 years after the Trojan War trying to get home. So let's go ahead and begin. The cattle of the sun god. In the small hours of the third watch, when stars that shone out in the first dusk of evening had gone down to their setting, a giant wind blew from heaven, and clouds driven by Zeus shrouded land and sea in a night of storm. So, just as dawn with fingertips of rose, remember that's personification, touched the windy world, we dragged our ship to cover in a grotto, a sea cave where nymphs had chairs of rock and sanded floors. So they're there and they're trying to stay protected from the storm that Zeus is bringing down on Odysseus, trying to prevent him from getting home. He's helping his brother Poseidon make it hard for him. And Odysseus tells us, I mustered all the crew and I said, old shipmates, our stores are in the ship's hold, food and drink. The cattle here are not for our provision, or we pay dearly for it. Fierce the god is who cherishes these heifers and these sheep, Helios, and no man avoids his eye. So this is a direct order by Odysseus. Don't touch the animals on this island. To this, my fighters nodded. So they're like, okay. Yes. But now we had a month of onshore gales blowing in and day out, south winds or south by east. As long as bread and good red wine remained down in the stores of the ship, right, to keep the men up and appease their craving, they would not touch the cattle. But in the end, when all the barley in the ship was gone, hunger drove them to scour the wild shore with angling hooks for fishes and seafowl, whatever fell into their hands, and lean days wore their bellies thin, so the men are starving. The storms continued. So one day I withdrew to the interior of the island to pray the gods in solitude for hope that one might show me some way of salvation. Slipping away, I struck across the island to a sheltered spot out of the driving gale. So it's still been storming. I washed my hands there and I made supplication. Now, supplication is when you get down and maybe you put your hands up, but you are basically being deferential to the gods, right? You're saying, please, gods, listen to me. He says, I made supplication to the gods who own Olympus, all the gods, but they, for answer, only closed my eyes under slow drops of sleep. So he believes that the gods made him fall asleep. Now on the shore, Eurylochus, this is one of Odysseus's sailors, he made an insidious plea. Now, insidious means it's sort of stealthy and underhanded. He's about to commit mutiny. And Eurylochus says, comrades, he said, you've gone through everything. Listen to what I say. All deaths are hateful to us, mortal wretches, but famine is the most pitiful, the worst end that a man can come to. And will you fight it? Come, we'll cut out the noblest of these cattle for sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And once we're at home in the old country of Ithaca, if ever that day comes, we will build a costly temple and we will adorn it. That means we will decorate it with every beauty for the Lord of Noon. So we're going to kill his cattle, but in payment, we're going to build him a big temple, right? We're going to make sacrifices to him. But if he flares up over his heifers lost, if he gets mad at us, wishing our ship destroyed, and if the gods make a cause with him, why then I say better open your lungs to a big sea once and for all, so we might as well drown than waste his skin and bones on a lonely island. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were hungry and starving, that would have sounded like a very convincing argument because I mean, you're going to eat a cow, yes, but you're going to make a sacrifice, right? But they were told, don't touch the cattle, right? And then, thus, Eurylochus and they murmured, aye, like, yes, yes, trooping away at once to round up the heifers. Now, that day, tranquil cattle with broad brows were gazing near, and soon the men drew up around their chosen beasts in company. So they sneak up around these cattle. They plucked the leaves that shone on a tall oak, having no barley meal to strew the victims. So, like a sacrifice, okay? They performed the prayers and the ritual. They knifed the kine, that means the cattle, and they flayed each carcass, cutting thigh bones free to wrap in double folds of fat. That would be a good sacrifice to the gods on a normal day. These offerings with strips of meat were laid upon the fire. Then, as they had no wine, they made libation with clear spring water, broiling the entrails, the intestines first, and when the bones were burnt and the tripes shared, they spitted the carved meat. So you know what a spit is, right? It is a long piece of metal like a lance that you're going to put the piece of meat right over that, and you're going to roll it. You're going to have it over a fire, and you're going to turn the meat so it roasts, okay? So Odysseus is asleep while all this is going on. He does not know what his sailors are doing. But it says, just then my slumber left me in a rush. My eyes opened, and I went down the seaward path. No sooner had I caught sight of our black hole than savory odors of burnt fat eddied around me. Grief took hold of me, and I cried out loud, Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever, you made me sleep away this day of mischief. Oh, cruel drowsing in the evil hour. Here they sat, and a great work they contrived. Lampetia in her long gown, meanwhile, had borne swift to the overlord of noon. So this is a nymph, a sea nymph, and she's going to go tattletale on the sailors. And she says, they've killed your kine. And the Lord Helios burst into angry speech amid the immortals. So he goes running into Zeus, and this is what he says. Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever, punish Odysseus's men, so overweening. Now they've killed my peaceful kine, my joy at morning when I climbed the sky of stars, and at evening when I bore westward from heaven. Or let's recall that Helios is the god that goes across the sky. That's what they imagined was happening, that there was a god in a chariot crossing the sky, and that was what the sun was, right? And he says, restitution or penalty they shall pay, and pay in full, or I go down forever to light the dead in the underworld. So that's a big threat. And then Zeus, who drives the storm cloud, made this reply. Peace, Helios, shine on among the gods, shine over mortals in the fields of grain. Let me throw down one white hot bolt and make splinters of their ship in the wine dark sea. Calypso later told me of this exchange as she declared that Hermes had told her. So this is how he's able to tell it to King Alcinous that this is what had happened. Well, when I reached the sea cave and the ship, I faced each man and I had it out. But where could any remedy be found? In other words, what good is it to yell and scream and gripe them out, right? There was none. The silken beeves of Helios were dead. The gods, moreover, were making queer signs appear. This part is very, very weird. Okay, it's very strange. Cow hides began to crawl, and beef, both raw and roasted, lowed, so it's mooing like kine upon the spit. So as it's turning, the ghosts of the cows are coming up and they're coming alive. Now, 6 full days, my gallant crew could feast upon the prime beef they had marked for slaughter, for Helios is heard, and Zeus, the son of Cronos, added one fine morning. This is where it seems like things are going to be good. All the gales had ceased, all the winds they had blown out, and with an offshore breeze we launched again, stepping the mast and sail. We made for the open sea, so it looks like there is a good breeze that the storms have stopped. We were able to get off the island. Astern of us, the island coastline faded, so there it goes, Helios's island, going back and back, and no land showed anywhere, but only the sea and heaven. So they are deep out in the middle of the ocean. When Zeus Cronion piled a thunderhead above our ship, while gloom spread on the ocean, so it's getting darker and darker, blacker and blacker in the skies, right? We held our course, but only briefly. Then the squall struck, whining from the west. That means a huge storm with gale force breaking both of the forestays, and the mast came toppling aft along the ship's length. So the running rigging showered into the bilge. That means all of the parts of their ship are crashing down. On the afterdeck, the mast had hit the steersman a slant blow, bashing the skull in, knocking him over side. So there goes one of his soldiers. As the brave soul fled the body like a diver. See that simile there? With crack on crack of thunder, Zeus let fly a bolt against the ship, a direct hit, so that she bucked in reeking fumes of sulfur. All the men were flung into the sea. They came up around the wreck, bobbing a while like petrels on the waves. That's another simile. So they look like birds floating on the ocean, but they're dead men, right? Floating in the ocean. No more seafaring homeward for these, no sweet day of return. The god had turned his face from them. I clambered fore and aft my hulk until a comber, that means a big wave, split her keel from ribs, and the big timber floated free. The mast, too, broke away. A backstay floated dangling from it, stout rawhide rope, and I used this for lashing mast and keel together. These I straddled, riding the frightening storm. So Odysseus is quick thinking enough. He can grab some floating wood, tie it together, get on and kind of try to float it out, right? But nor had I yet seen the worst of it. For now the west wind dropped and a southeast gale came on. One more twist of the knife, like you are just getting the torture, someone stabbing you in the back, making you pay, right? And it says, taking me north again, straight for Charybdis. You guys remember the big whirlpool, right? All that night I drifted, and in the sunrise, sure enough, I lay off of Scylla Mountain and Charybdis deep. There, as the whirlpool drank the tide, right, sucking it down and down, a billow tossed me, and I sprang for a great fig tree, catching on like a bat under the bough. Nowhere had I to stand, no way of climbing, the root and the bole being far below and far above my head, the branches and the leaves massed overshadowing Charybdis pool. So he has been flung up and he's grabbing onto a branch that's hanging off of the rock, and he's hanging over Charybdis now, though. He is really in danger. So he's slipping on this branch. Moving on. But I clung grimly, thinking that my mast and keel would come back to the surface when she spouted, because when Charybdis was sucking down the water, it also sucked down the wood that he had been riding on. And he's hoping that when she spews again, when Charybdis spews, that wood will come back up. And how long with what desire I waited, till at the twilight hour, when one who hears the judges and pleas in the marketplace all day between contentious men goes home to supper, the long poles at last reared from the sea. Now that little portion, let me explain. It means that this is kind of deep into the evening. If you were in a city and it was the end of a day of trading in a marketplace, men that are making bargains and kind of yelling back and forth, and everything is starting to quiet down, this is about the time of the day, getting dark, that this is when the wood bobbed back up to the surface. Now I let go with my hands and feet, plunging straight into the foam beside the timbers. Right? I pulled astride and I rode hard with my hands to pass by Scylla, and never could I have passed her had not the Father of gods and men this time kept me from her eyes. So he says, this time Zeus actually protected me. Once through the strait, 9 days I drifted in the open sea before I made shore, buoyed up by the gods upon Ogygia Isle. The dangerous nymph Calypso lives and sings there in her beauty, and she received me, and she loved me. But why tell the same tale that I told you last night in the hall to you and your lady? Those adventures made a long evening, and I don't hold with tiresome repetition of a story. So that was the last bad adventure that Odysseus wants to tell of his 10 years. He's telling this to King Alcinous. So that is the end of the cattle of the sun gods. We can see that the fate of the men that was foretold, it came true. They were warned, but the men did not listen to Odysseus's clear rule not to touch the cattle. So please come back for part 2 of the Odyssey, and that is all for now.